Marthurion Silverbait, a World of Warcraft original character story. Marthurion's life was, in its early years, a fairly normal life. His mother took care of him, and his father was a part of the force of Gilneas, supplying money to the family. It's not like they were rich, they were more like a poor family, but they managed. They lived outside of Gilneas, in a small shack with a very small farm that they maintained. As I said, Marthurion's father was never home around in the early years because he was part of the force of Gilneas. But, to surprise Marthurion for his 13th birthday, he was surprised to see his father home. Marthurion's father retired from the force and promised he'd be with the family and take more care of them. But, to Marth's disappointment, he became a drunkard. Arthur Silverbane, Marthurion's father, nearly spent all of his money on drinks and always used the excuse that he's still looking for a job. Fast forward a few months and Marthurion's mother, Elaine, got a chronic illness, a sort of illness that affected her heart, and her body quickly regressed. In no more than a year, she was on the brink of death, and meanwhile, Marthurion did jobs as much as he could in order to earn money. But Arthur even stole some of Marthurion's money in order to buy drinks. Because of this, they could never afford the treatment for his mother. Marthurion's mother passed 4 days after his 14th birthday, and as for Arthur, he went into a deep depression, blaming Marth for the death of Elaine. It started off with shouting and blaming, but after a few weeks it became more abusive. He'd beat Marthurion over and over, occasionally breaking his nose or bruise one of his ribs badly. And this went on for a couple of weeks as well, before Marthurion one night got beat so badly that his jaw was cracked, his nose broke, one of his wrists was broken as well, trying to defend himself. So, during that night, when Arthur went to bed, Marthurion took up Arthur's sword with all his might that he had. He went and sat atop his drunk father, who was fast asleep, and struck it down through his chest. Arthur gasped for air, but couldn't really make any sounds, and before he could do anything, Marthurion ripped out the blade and stabbed it down again and again, several times until his father stopped moving. Marthurion then fled from home. He ran into a nearby shack. It was a shack for farming resources from one of their neighbors, and waited there all night until the morning. A delivery man who delivered food from Stormwind to Gilneas and back passed by. He quickly jumped on the ride and hid himself away until they arrived in Stormwind. But he was caught as soon as he jumped out by the guards. They took him in, inspecting him for any injuries, weapons, or anything like that. And though he was covered in dried blood, he held his head up straight and smiled. He knew he was safe now. While the guards were inspecting him, they saw that his face was bruised, his nose was broken, and his wrist was also broken. They asked Marthurion what happened, but Marthurion basically said that it was nothing. With a wide smile on his face, he just said he'd fallen off a big mountain accidentally, and that was why he was injured. When they asked him about the dried blood, however, he didn't respond. The guards helped him get fixed up and let him be. Marth was homeless for a long time, and with his small childlike body, he did the little jobs he could in order to earn money and save up for a training sword besides the food he bought, of course. He got his little training sword at the age of 15. When he bought it, he trained himself at the location of where the embassy now is. He wasn't amazing, and training yourself up isn't an easy task. He progressed little compared to someone who would undergo regular training, but often there were people being assholes, And even though Marthurion was only a weak child, he started acting up and being tough, trying to defend the people who got in trouble. He got into a lot of trouble when he was little, and he still does. He'd often try and protect anyone he needs, sometimes even taking out his training sword and beating people. But of course, with the little power he had, there wasn't much he could do. One of the more friendly guards came up to Marth and offered him combat training. From the young age of 15, Marthurion's only thing he ever considered good at was combat. The man's identity unknown for privacy reasons, Marthurion underwent harsh training, from being beaten up to repeated harsh hand-to-hand combat training with little to no remorse. It taught him that pain is a good teacher, and loss is an even better one. He got to know the cruel reality of the world, and this harsh training turned him into what he is today. When Marthurion turned 18, he got his first real sword, a sword very similar to that of his father's, but he didn't mind. He now fought alongside his instructor as a guard, and quickly got an offer for his incredible combat skill to join the 7th Legion. He even surpassed his instructor, and after serving in the 7th Legion for years up until the First War, he retired. He saw the wars as useless conflict to create conflict. The Third and the Fourth. Let's start with the Third War, the Burning Legion. Marthurion was often called the small version of his rival, as he was just as brutal. A lot of his comrades actually mocked him for it, but that made Marthurion happy. He felt the recognition. Whether that was a negative, positive, didn't matter to him. During the Third War, Marthurion was sent on an expedition alongside a team of comrades to take out the demons that were infiltrating the eastern kingdoms. When he arrived at the location, he held the line easily, not alone, however. He was part of a force that drove the demons out of Azeroth. Nothing special really happened. He wasn't harmed permanently. It was just fighting demons, or Scourge. During the Fourth War, however, things changed. He and a group of 5 others went on an expedition to exterminate a horde camp that had been obstructing the Alliance plans, though they didn't obstruct anything. It was a lie in order to justify killing these innocent souls. In fact, this group was a group of horde rebels who had already caught on to Sylvanas' plans, or at least understood that Sylvanas wasn't on their side, and they didn't want to be a part of it. When they arrived, they set up a plan. The horde camp, however, also had children in the tents, and there were more than 10 horde there, so they'd have to plan it out carefully. And so they did. Marthurion would go behind the two, while the others would start setting the tents on fire, and separating the force of the horde so that they could take them down as easily as possible. As Marth went behind them, he noticed that the tents weren't filled with food or sleeping places or weapons, but in fact, one of the bigger tents had children in it. He attempted to stop the assault, but he was too late. Tents were set ablaze, and as the horde stormed at the Alliance, Marthurion took the opportunity to run in the tent with the children and get them out. In the process, he was struck by an arrow in his back, burned on his lower leg, incapacitated by another arrow that struck him, and before he could save the last child, he collapsed and the child was stuck underneath the rubble of the tent. He collapsed in front of the children, looking like he was dead, and the horde group then left for days. Then, one time, they came back with more people in order to scavenge whatever they could. And when the horde came to scavenge, they realized Marth was still alive. They tried to finish the job, but the children quickly stopped them in order to prevent Marthurion's death. They explained the situation, and the horde group thanked him greatly. In return for his great service, they took care of him until his wounds recovered, and he was able to move again. Marthurion was the only survivor of that assault. The horde explained who they were and what they did, and Marth apologized for ever trying to insult them. He thanked them greatly for allowing him to recover and taking him in. He had stayed with them since he had nowhere else to go. But after a couple of days, the camp got overrun. They killed all of the horde, including the children, and Marth was furious, as those soldiers claimed to have saved Marth. Marth couldn't do anything but say that they did, because if he were to say that he was friends with them, he would be considered a traitor and killed. If he fought back, he would be killed. He had no choice. Marthurion went back to Stormwind and debriefed his team captain and then retired. After he retired, he decided he'd go traveling, and he did. He went traveling for a couple of weeks, away from Stormwind. When he returned, he met many interesting people. One of these people being Vlina Velsiniel. Vlina is a person who directs her goals to making the world a better place, and her goals aligned with those of Marthurion. Marthurion decided he'd join Vlina in her mission to make the world a better place, and in doing so, got to meet plenty of other interesting people. During this time, Marthurion was, well, there was a lot that happened after this. Marthurion later became a worgen. With his mate, he traveled to Gilneas, where they explored the city, and Marthurion would kind of explain what the city was about, since it was his birthplace. In doing so, they came across a feral worgen who had been running rampant across the city for God knows whatever reason. To Marthurion's surprise, he was bitten by the worgen, and later turned out to become one. He became a worgen, and it was, for him, a big learning process. After that, Marthurion went to Stormheim after a while. Skuld Ash Hill. While being there, he remained in the abandoned tower, gathering information, resources, and using it as a hideout of sorts. It had seemed Marthurion ran into trouble. His latest run-in with the Horde forces that remain within the Broken Isles have left him wounded, and for now, he resides within the abandoned watchtower in Skuld Ash Hill. He writes a letter saying, Vlina, I write you in a dire time. I know it has been a while, a long while, but I write to you nonetheless. I live and breathe, and I am happy to say that much, but I fear I will be unable to return to Stormwind as of any time soon. The Horde and Tidescorn that yet still live make it unable for me to leave. If I were to even so much as try and leave, I would be met with dozens of Rykles, and as much as I like to brag, there is no way I'm traversing through that no matter what. I will return as soon as I possibly can. Kind regards, Marthurion Silverbane. He would eventually, within his room, feel a creeping sensation growing from a corner, a shadow boiling on the wall like it was blood. From within, several hands shaped thin and pointy would emerge, only to grow the shadow by pulling the corners, like trying to tear open a larger hole in reality. With that happening, a deformed, compact, and pitch-black humanoid figure would come out, with eyes as hollow as a lifeless husk, only to slowly make its way towards the closest table, and with each slow and sluggish step, shadow left a trail behind to evaporate in no more than a few seconds. It would place its hand on top of the table in the abandoned tower, only to drop a piece of a rolled-in parchment from within its own body. After doing so, it would walk back towards the wall, dropping inside the hole of darkness that was formed. The swift glimpse of wickedness, vileness, and horror would soon follow the shadow's descent to leave. The parchment would smell just like Vlina. Her aromatics were a signature of hers, and also the fact that it was sealed with red wax at the end of it. The mark of the house of Velsiniel inside, the following words in extreme calligraphy. Dearest Marthurion Silverbane, 'tis a grand pleasure knowing thee are still a-walking amongst the world of the living, for indeed 'tis was a grand and lengthy amount of time since our latest conversation. Thee are free to inform me of the reason hidden behind the facts thee are being chased by those groups, for whom is at fault for such manhunt lies still unknown. If thy wisheth, support may be provided, but for that to happen, an entire explanation would be required. I knoweth not the reason behind thy sudden urge to leave, but they are free taketh thy time for our dearest group. The Emerald Eye is mostly on hold. Many people decided to follow and carve their own life paths. Instead, I have found willing individuals from the opposing faction, the Horde itself, which will be proven quite useful for the days to come. Perhaps we may get a chance to speak with thy informant that thee once possessed. With that aside, if thou wish to be brought back, I know that can be done with ease, unless thee maketh thy way inside an anti-magic zone. May thy way shine as bright as the sun, and Porcus watch over thee, Vlenevel Signal. A complicated signature follows after the last word, and a stamp at the shape of the horned demon on top of it. Marthurion's eyes would widen as he sat atop the tower at the table, his eyes following the shady fellow. However, as soon as the parchment would be placed down, he could already smell the same aromatics as he was used to from long ago. He takes up the parchment as soon as the figure leaves and opens it, taking off the wax seal and reading it in his own time. Upon doing so, he begins to write once more, this letter a bit more calmly written, or so it appears from his writing. I am afraid I must inform you upon my arrival I may have accidentally traversed through the Horde lands, or well, Horde-controlled ones. Upon doing so, I was chased down by a group of Horde scouts that still reside there, and I have become a target. As for the fraggle, I might have, well, stolen a supply of Storm Dragon's scales. Originally, I thought it was just up for grabs because it was left unattended, though I thought it would be interesting to the rest is a bunch of scribbles that follow the text. He clearly changed his mind on letting Glimmer know. That's not important, but you know now what I did. About being brought back, maybe, sure, I guess that's fine. And good news to hear about the Horde. Great to hear, in fact. Hope to see you soon. Kind regards, Marthurion Silverbane. A bloody, worn crooked arrives at the doorstep of the HQ. No bird this time, just a weird-looking letter. It reads the following: Members of the Eye, anyone, I bring dire news. You have received letters, I assume, the lot of you, or just Flynna. It is described how I was in Stormwind, stuck. I'm glad to inform you that I got out. With a stroke of luck, I found a broken boat in a cave nearby. I know, pure luck, perhaps a bit too much to be true. I'm currently at sea, but I tell you this. I found something. Not dragon scales, not enemies, but a book. Something's coming, of that no doubt. But before you pull conclusions, listen. I didn't just find a book. You should take this seriously. If all this serves right, it could mean that there is knowledge out there undiscovered. Something has risen. Of that I am sure. And the thing that has many men under his banner already. Many more to come. If we don't stop this, why should we deal with this? Well, it's not a bunch of things are scribbled out and unintelligible. It's after me. I am lucky I am at sea, but I have a feeling I won't last long. I am currently sailing towards Coltiris. I will send another note once I reach there with more information. Sincerest apologies and kind regards, Marthurion Silverbane. Marthurion arrives and shipwrecks at the shore of a part of Coltiris. He instantly makes his way to Borealis Harbor. As he gets there, he gasps for air, stumbling to his knees, breathing heavily in paranoia. He checks over each of his shoulders for a moment and falls forward, flat on the ground on his stomach. He rolls over, looking up at the sky, and with a sudden thrust of anxiety, he springs up, his eyes wide. He sits at the harbor, hastily writing a letter. But before he can get that far, he spots a menace in silver armor, a long sword to accompany them, and a godly feel to them. Marth abruptly stops his writing and gets up and runs. He drops the letter and pencil he was writing with and dashes off. In sheer fear, he charges off, away from Borealis Harbor, back into Coltiris. There is no telling who this fiend in silver armor is, nor why Marth is running from him, and nor why he chases after Marth. The Silver Knight with a touch of death. This is the last part that I'm going to be talking about. There was a lot of things that did happen in character that I won't be going over, but this is the last part that I will talk about. And this is something that is to come, and I will make a video about the character that this is regarding to in the future. For now, this is it for Marthurion. Marthurion rushes through the plains of Drustvar, the night not far behind. The Drust begin chasing them for their intrusion, and while Marth seems to struggle fending them off, the knight swipes them aside with ease, cleaving the hounds and Drust in half like a knife cutting through butter. Marthurion, terrified, keeps going. He stumbles, falls several times, and clumsily he gets back up on his feet. He transforms into his Worgen form, leaping through the plains of Drasvar, and eventually passing a big tree. The knight emerges from behind the tree like he was waiting there, and with a strong backhand, he slams into Marthurion's snout. Marthurion falls onto his back with a loud thud and begins crawling backwards, his snout bleeding, blood running down the fur and his armor. The Silver Knight, on the other hand, raises his blade and silver longsword up, and in swift succession he brings it down. Marthurion was lucky to have his gauntlets. He's capable of blocking such a strike, pushing the blade to the side, and yet it all proved pointless. The knight carried on, not even buckling under the force. He dropped the blade and leaned down towards Marthurion. You will be far more useful in death. Marthurion mutters as if in prayer, and yet the Silver Knight lifts him up by his neck, looking up at Marthurion, who is now struggling to breathe. His low, echoing, and yet booming voice emits, "The naive men pray to the gods, but in time they will learn to pray to me." Marthurion, fear in his eyes, would yet still try to retaliate. He was kicking and flailing within the grip of the knight. He even spat into the knight's helmet. He said, "Curse you!" in a wheezing, struggling voice, and yet the knight stared at him as if in disgust. A reminiscing moment of silence happens before he mutters, "Let the foolish curse me. Your gods will not save you from me." With that, his other hand came in for a fierce strike at Marthurion's head, knocking him out clean. In the meantime, Skysoar, Marthurion's bird, that had sent former messages to Vlina, seems to arrive once more at the Alliance HQ, sitting atop the boxes, screeching out like a distress call, seemingly trying to get the attention of anyone he can that is part of the Eye. And that, my friends, is Marthurion's story. I went on a bit longer than I actually was supposed to. Everything after this picture, everything that I said after this picture came up on screen was randomly added on because I thought it was a bit short otherwise. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you like Marthurion's story. He's still full-on in development through icy stuff that happens to him. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, smash the thumbs up button. I will try to make more character stories for other characters that I have. It is just a bit hard going into the Narcissus every single time to make all of these pictures, going to all of the different locations. I think that is possibly the most time consuming for me at least. And I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, smash that thumbs up button, subscribe if you're new, turn on your notifications, and if you want to see more videos like this, definitely let me know, and I'll be seeing you next time. Bye bye.